Welcome, welcome. I'm clicking the go live on lots of different things we got going on here. Chris, you might have to hit go live on your side. I'm not thinking it's live.
Yeah.
But it is live on your YouTube channel, so we did get that going. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. This is Teresa and Eris. Welcome to my YouTube channel. We have a really fun show prepared for tonight. We are talking all things UAP. So let's introduce our panel. First up, we have Christopher McGarvey. He's an Eastern Orthodox Christian who studied theology at St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary, where he earned his MDiv. He developed a deep interest in ufology after an anomalous experience of his own that led him to meet UFO experiencers, which we're going to learn more about, I'm sure, today. And he just recently launched his own podcast called Answers in the Anomalies. I linked it down below. You can check out the very first episode. It was very interesting, Chris. I'm really excited to hear more. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hello.
Yeah, hello. Also, we have Luke Tanyi. He's a Roman Catholic and a research fellow specializing in historical theology and the intersection of ancient wisdom and modern mysteries. He explores how Christian cosmology, doctrine, and hagiography can help us navigate the challenging high-stakes reality of the UAP phenomenon. So he's here to bridge the gap between historical faith and the unknown. So thank you for being here, Luke. Next, we have Dr. Matthew Shadagas. He's a physicist and practicing Roman Catholic, hunting for the universe's most elusive secrets, from his work in experimental particle astrophysics and dark matter to the true nature of UAP. Ultimately, he's a man of science, bridging the gap between childhood wonder and cutting-edge discovery. Welcome, Professor Matthew. Thank you guys all so much for being here. And I thought we would just start the show today with going around the circle, and I want to ask you guys just a base level question. What got you into ufology and what's your skin in the game? And I'd love to start with, how about we start with Christopher?
All right. Yeah, for me, I developed an interest after a coworker recommended an episode of the new Unsolved Mysteries episodes back in the pandemic, and there was an episode on these sightings in the Northeast, and I thought they were really compelling. I'd always had kind of a curiosity, but things really ramped up for me when I had my own personal anomalous experience back in the summer of 2023, which I could not get any answers for or understand, and that basically drove me straight into the arms of UFO Twitter, where I began to meet actual alien abductees and experiencers in live chats. So that kind of blew my mind.
You tripped into UFO Twitter. Uh-oh.
Yeah. So I really started consuming a whole bunch of books. I took a course with Dr. Diana Pasulka. Yeah, I haven't looked back. I've just been going deeper ever since.
Nice. Thank you for sharing, Christopher. What about you, Luke? What got you into ufology?
Well, I'd say, I was a sci-fi kid. And so in some sense, I always looked at that interest alongside my faith, which it became much more, I don't want to say important to me, but much more sort of sophisticated as I went through my studies. And so long was sitting as a question in the back of my mind, which is, what would it mean to affirm another, let's say, personal being that is not angelic? And what would that mean for doctrine? And for me, it seemed, as we've developed a deeper understanding of the universe's scale, the probability of evolution, and all these sorts of things, putting it together, it seems like it's not improbable that there would be some other kind of life of that sort. And so that had long been in my mind, sort of in general, like, how would that work out? Then, once you have sort of things starting to poke around in around 2017, it sort of was on my radar, but I was deep into working on my doctoral dissertation. It was kind of there, but I was like, oh, that's interesting. COVID hits, okay, kind of interesting, busy with a whole bunch of things. It was actually 2023 when, after the Chinese balloon was shot down, that you had the 3 UAP shootdowns in Yukon, Alaska, and Lake Huron, that actually drew me into UAP Twitter. And I was like, wait a second, there's so much more going on than I was paying attention to. And then, of course, not long after that, you have Grush and a whole bunch of governmental momentum around that, which had started actually, of course, before then. But that tapped me into something much more serious moving around here. And so
interesting.
At that point that I sort of was like, oh, I have some skin in the game, because this seems like it could be a question that unfolds perhaps more quickly than I ever anticipated, and that could have, doctrinal consequences and therefore pastoral consequences downstream.
And I can't wait to hear more from you, Luke. I'm really excited to get to know you more and hear some of your answers to these questions. So thank you for being here.
More like questions to my questions.
Yeah, we're just going to sit here and ask questions back and forth, basically, because that's all UAP studies are. What about you, Matthew? What got you onto UFOs?
Well, I share a lot in common with Luke and Christopher. I watched Unsolved Mysteries, the original, not the new, with Robert Stack, and saw, terrifying, the Rendlesham Forest episode, absolutely terrified me. And I know your connection, Teresa, with that, so I thought I'd throw that out there, is that episode. And then sci-fi, like Luke, I'm a huge fan of science fiction, lots of science fiction and fantasy, including a lot of positive and Christian themes. I'll never forget, for example, there's this great Star Trek episode where they visit this planet that's like the Roman Empire. There are Christians, and people know what I'm talking about already, I think. So yeah, I love, sci-fi, especially with these, with a lot of, great pro-Christian messages, because they don't all obviously have that. But yeah, I love sci-fi, I love Unsolved Mysteries, but that was as a child. But then as an adult, it really was, again, everybody says this, the 2017 article in the New York Times, Lou Elizondo coming out. Now we have more people like, David Grush, Dylan Borland. But then as an academic at the university, I was really drawn into the whole space of UAP by my colleague, Professor Kevin Knuth, who's been doing UFO stuff for decades before 2017. In December 2017, he was like, see, I told you so. You guys shouldn't have been making fun of me, for decades. I told you the government was into it. Yeah, so that's really my backstory.
Very cool. I also love sci-fi, so I love that background. It's interesting to hear the media that get people into ufology in the very beginning, early ages. So I'll tell a little bit about my background. As Matthew alluded to earlier, I do have a background involving the Rendlesham Forest incident. My dad was an Air Force pilot. He flew A-10s, and he was stationed at RAF Woodbridge during the time of the Rendlesham Forest incident in 1980. So I was born in 87, so I was born into a family that was already really into ufology, government conspiracy, government cover-ups, things like that, what's being hidden from us, advanced technologies, those kinds of things. So when I went to school for journalism, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to study more of the weird. I didn't want to go into mainstream media. I wanted to go into alternative media, and that's what I did. So I started a YouTube channel back in 2014 and started talking about all kinds of crazy stuff. It led me down some interesting paths, some scary paths too. And coming out on the other end of it, I went through a pretty hard reversion, because I took the scenic route back home, is what I say. Went into some dark alleys, but coming back around into my faith in the last 8-9 years has been transformational. And I will also say that even just in the last probably 5 months has been really interesting to me to get to meet people like y'all, because I was feeling pretty lonely as a Roman Catholic, going no one's really having a beat on the UFO topic. And so I feel like I have a lot in common with you guys, and I'm already learning so much as I'm getting to know the group that I was introduced to. So I'm really excited to have this conversation, and I think we're going to have some cool things to talk about. So I want to go ahead and dive in now that we've done introductions. So I'm going to start with the UAP question. And our first question here is for Luke. And then after Luke answers, anyone else can open up. But I'm really interested in what Luke has to say on this. So the question is, what makes the present discussion of UAP and NHI particularly pressing now compared to the past?
So I alluded this already in terms of what drew me into the question. And I think one aspect that makes it pressing is the sort of transparent, transparent is maybe the funny word to use here, but increasingly transparent governmental and scientific interest in the matter, which I think lends credibility to being some kind of there, especially at the Senate level. And then I always like to point out, and this is maybe, if someone's heard me say this before, that's fine, but probably not. The fact that the Canadian government, which is extremely conservative in many ways, would issue a UAP reporting report called the Sky Canada Project is, I think, quite a tell, because Canada doesn't like to get flustered over issues that seem perhaps flighty. We don't like to talk about those sorts of things. Carney is a good representative of that, sort of keep it steady. That we went so far to say there's something to be taken seriously in this kind of reporting, not just in the American government, but in governments around the world, suggests to me that there's a credibility here behind the scenes of an issue that deserves attention. And if it deserves attention and is starting to get that kind of attention, then other people are going to start to poke their heads up and think about it more seriously, especially as more scientific information is coming out about this, which means we're going to be generating more discussion around the issue. And so why the UAP question needs to be taken seriously from a religious perspective is I think more and more people will in fact have questions about it. And then the kinds of questions that they will ask will draw some kinds of answers. The kinds of answers that they form start developing worldviews, and those worldviews start to become propagated. And then all of a sudden, by the time perhaps something either does or does not come out, but a worldview has percolated widely enough, you can have crises emerge. And it's for that reason that I think that the church, as a pastoral and teaching institution, has to have some kind of preparation around the issue, because it will be talked about more and more and more. And I think, as we think about what just happened with Monsignor Rossetti last week, we already see how that was just a minor blow up, just from a small kind of percolation around the issue. And if we're not able to have some kind of, let's say, framework for engaging those discussions, I think we could be leading people either to be sort of imprudent in the way they talk about the issue or to feel abandoned on the issue. I think because more and more people will, admit that they've had anomalous experiences. People that I didn't ever expect would say so. I've met would say like, actually, I've seen lights over Lake Michigan. I was like, oh. And they just took off. I'm like, oh, yeah. The more people that I meet, the more that they have it. And I think when those pieces come together, that people have experiences and we have increasing credibility that there is a there. What it is, of course, is not at all apparent. But those pieces come together, and I think you reach a critical mass in which you have to be ready to address people seriously. Sorry for the roundabout answer.
Yeah, no. You pulled up a lot of different things there that were important. And something that you just mentioned, I want to throw this actually to Christopher, because he was talking about this in his podcast, was this attitude that we're going to have pastoral needs around this issue and people having experiences and even maybe just having questions. And that's something that I address with helping people out of the occult and Freedom from Darkness, the book I wrote. I talk all about that. Like, we need pastoral care for people, and they don't have the language, they don't have the understanding, and they can shame people and even like create even more issues. Chris, can you talk a little bit about your perspective on this side?
I could not agree more on that. I think why this topic is urgent is because it's coming to us whether we like it or not, and it's already hit mainstream media. We have we have Congress people openly asking questions about whether we've even made past agreements with beings. I mean, it gets really crazy really fast, and that's happening among our government officials, and these are not people that go on a limb voluntarily a lot. They don't stick their neck out for something that that is going to get them in big trouble, and there's nothing to it. So but just on a personal level, I've been through something really unusual, and I felt completely isolated and alone. I think that experiences with the anomalous are a lot more common than people realize. And I was just hanging out recently at a picnic with our choir members from church, and I was telling them I'm starting this podcast, and one of them said, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've been abducted. I think I've got an implant," and she volunteered that because I kind of made it known that I was doing this. But I think people would be surprised how common it is, that there is someone that's quietly keeping this all to themselves and really doesn't have anywhere to go. And some of these things can be a real crisis of faith. It's when something breaks into your world that isn't supposed to exist. It really can shatter a worldview and leave you scrambling for answers. And I know when I went through something strange, it kind of felt like everything was up for grabs. I'm like, okay, if what I thought, there's more in this world than I expected. Now what do I do?
Yeah.
I just think it's important for our pastors and priests to get ready, just maybe to be more open to listening and take this stuff seriously.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's interesting that we actually have a question here in the chat right now that I want to address directly right now. So literally what we're talking about right now, we're having an opportunity to have this discussion. The Mandy Effect says, none of the Orthodox priests in my local area are willing to help regarding the demonic and also UAP related problems. She asks the question, should I convert to Roman Catholicism and get help from an exorcist? And what I want to say to you, Mandy, is I'm sorry that you're having issues, and you don't have to convert to Roman Catholicism to speak with somebody that can possibly help you. What I would recommend, and this is what I always say to people, if they think that they need spiritual help, you can look at your diocesan office. So in your area, you have a Roman Catholic diocese, and you can contact their office and you can tell them what's going on and you can ask for help. If you need help doing this, I'm going to drop my email address to Spirit Sanctified here in the chat. So if you need help with this, I'm happy to help you get acquainted with how to contact that office. But just generally speaking, that's the advice that I give, because hopefully you'll be able to find someone locally that can assist with your questions. Okay, so next I would like to ask Christopher, what would be our panelists' top, I'm going to start with Christopher and then we're all going to go around. What would be our panelists' top suggestions for books or documentaries that most accurately introduce the situation to newcomers?
Yeah, that was my own question, and I don't know how to answer it. I think it's tough because the issue is so complicated, and it's so weird. Okay, that you kind of need to get multiple perspectives, because a lot of people, we bring our own frameworks to the conversation, what we expect, and sometimes that limits our view of the facts we're taking in and even the questions we're asking. So you need a little bit of the nuts and bolts history, and you need a little bit of the woo-woo, just how weird everything gets. So for a great nuts and bolts history, no one has done it better than Richard Dolan, the UFOs and the National Security State. I mean, it's like the textbook of the history of the whole topic, but he doesn't delve deep into the super weird side. It's there. But for that, I honestly think nobody has really done a better job at introducing the whole topic than Kelly Chase with the UFO Rabbit Hole podcast. It's a very beginner-friendly walkthrough, episode by episode, and the different topics that arise, and it's not afraid to go everywhere the topic leads. That's why it's the UFO Rabbit Hole.
Nice. What do you think, Matthew? You got any suggestions for us?
Oh, it's so hard to just do. You literally want one? Like, I can't say more than one?
You can say 2 or 3.
Okay, it's really hard. If I could only have one, then it's weird, because it's not going to introduce people to UFOs, but it will introduce people to Catholic and Christian thinking on what if there are other beings. So if I have only one, the number one thing that I'd recommend everybody has to get a copy of and read right away in this time is Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Catholic Faith by Paul Thigpen, by Dr. Paul Thigpen, the late Dr. Paul Thigpen, God rest him. So his subtitle is Are We Alone in the Universe with God and the Angels? I wanted to show a copy right now on camera. I can't find it. I don't know, maybe a demon, stole it off my bookshelf or something. I literally can't find it where it's supposed to be on the bookcase. But that is the number one critical book for a measured and very complete perspective that goes back to centuries of church fathers, including ones that Christopher would agree with, like pre-1054, going back millennia. Now, on the UFO topic in general, and just from like a secular perspective, I would recommend UFOs UFO by Garrett M. Graff, and UFOs by, you got it, awesome, yes,
there it is.
Book, you must strongly recommend all listeners read that, because it's really eye-opening. I was shocked reading that book. I was shocked to discover that at one point in church history, it was like the complete opposite of what certain people think right now, where if you didn't believe in aliens, it was heresy, not the other way around. Like, it's insane. Like, it's eye-opening what kind of history people have forgotten. From theologians, from church fathers, going back to the 300s, 400s, 500s. And so in terms of secular books, yeah, I recommend UFO by Garrett Graff. Excellent book. Excellent balanced book that covers UFOs in general, covers the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And another good one is by a good friend of mine, Robert Powell, and that is UFOs. What scientists, gosh, I got to remember his subtitle now. I think it's What Scientists Know and Don't Know. I'm looking it up right now to make sure I give the right.
All right, and Luke, we got to kind of rock through. We were 20 minutes in. We got a lot to cover. So Luke, throw out some advice for us for a book or a podcast or a documentary, and then we're going to keep rocking.
Okay, I'll give you 3 really shortly. Maybe I'll just give you 2. Take a look at the Soul Foundation white papers, because there's a précis of Paul's book there. So if you want a quick version, Paul's white paper. Then also Peter Scafish's white paper has a overview of sort of governmental interaction around the issue recently. And that's 100 pages long, but it's worth looking at. For as a historical theologian, if you want a nice piece of early modern trying to deal with the issue, not as a UFO, but as non-human intelligence, Ludovico Sinistrare's De Demonialibus is an interesting work that shows a theological attempt to deal with something in between a human and an angel, or basically like a Catholic attempt to deal with jinn. And it deals with all sorts of interesting stuff in there. And there's an English translation that can be found for free online. So that's Ludovico Sinistrare's De Demonialibus.
Okay, I'm going to have you guys after the stream email me links to the books y'all think we need to read and the audience needs to read, and I'll drop it in the description because these are great requests. And I'm actually just starting to read the one by Paul Thigpen. So it's been really good so far. Okay, so we're going to dive into the conversation about Monsignor Rossetti. So for people who don't know, I'm going to give a little bit of the background on the situation, and then I have a couple of questions to pose to the panel. So on June 3rd, 2026, Cardinal Robert McElroy, the Archbishop of Washington, removed Monsignor Stephen Rossetti from his role as an archdiocesan exorcist and ended the archdiocese's affiliation with St. Michael's Center. The decision followed a video posted by Monsignor Rossetti on May 29th, in which he expressed his personal belief that many, if not most, UFO sightings are, in fact, demons. Cardinal McElroy stated that these remarks, combined with the center's recent use of social media, quote, gravely undermine the church's very precise teaching on the devil, demons, and exorcism, end quote. Monsignor Rossetti has since expressed his sadness over the decision, asked for forgiveness for any lack of faithfulness to the magisterium, and pledged his continued obedience to the church. There's been significant conversation around this, sparked by public claims linking UAP sightings to demonic activity. If you guys are online anywhere, you're seeing the cesspool of drama around this. People believe different things on it. And there's just a lot. There's a lot going on here. I actually pulled an interview that I had with Monsignor Rossetti from 2021. And I had actually asked him about the UFO issue. And I thought that his response was extremely reasonable. He said, yeah, I think maybe some of it's demonic. And I agree with that because I've gone to UFO hotspots. I've seen the way that people engage in occult activity and they go down and call them down. And so I've done videos on this. I've talked about this issue. And I want to open it up to you guys. Like, what do you guys think the real issue is here? What are your thoughts on him losing the position as exorcist? Luke, do you want to start us off? Or Matthew?
The only thing that I was going to say was, I think with these sorts of situations, it's hard to know the church politics behind them. And I think the difficulty with looking into anything that's Catholic news, especially when it's UFO Twitter looking into Catholic news, there's an assumption that there's sort of this level playing field of Catholicism and not 100 other issues. So to me, the statement seemed, not that surprising a statement from Rossetti in terms of saying, I don't know what this is. I think it's probably demonic in a lot of cases, but it doesn't rule out other sorts of things. And so that wasn't really the most hardline statement one might imagine. So it suggested to me that there was probably something else behind the scenes, maybe making this an opportune moment to bring out the chopping block. Okay.
What about you, Matthew?
Yeah, I'm very conflicted about this because initially, since, I do, one of my big things is I don't think that it's the right approach to just call 100% of things that we don't understand, that it's automatically evil, it's automatically all demonic, because even if it was 99%, that's still not 100. And so initially, I was like, oh yeah, that's the right thing. But then part of me is like, no, I don't think so. And the reason is because looking at what he said has been really actually balanced and measured. And also the church doesn't have any official teaching on UFOs, UAP, or especially, NHI, because we can't forget the U in UFO just means unidentified, right? The church doesn't need to have like a doctrine about an unknown natural phenomenon, right? So we're always talking about non-human intelligence. But the church doesn't have a specific doctrine. And Thigpen mentions this in his book repeatedly and in his, Soul Foundation white paper. And so I feel like it might have been kind of like Luke was saying, maybe it was the right decision for the wrong reasons. And I worry that framing his removal that way just provides nonstop ammunition. And I've seen it on social media, nonstop ammunition from Catholic and other Christian voices who are like, nope, no such thing as aliens, 100% demonic, and this is just fuel. They say, see, that cardinal's part of the conspiracy and the ET deception and everything, and you're just providing ammunition for people who feel that way. And so I'm not sure if this was, so I'm of two minds of it. I worry if there was a better reason for removal that should have been stated, because this is weird. No official magisterial teaching. And not only that, but also, like I said, he was just so balanced. And his response is, he's so humble. There's a whole series of saints who have been like kicked out or, banned from saying mass, like Padre Pio or something. And then it turns out, oh, they were right, and so that's why I'm concerned that it's providing fuel to people who think a certain way and not really. I'm not sure that it's going to have positive consequences, especially because we do need exorcists still. I still believe, I'm a Catholic. I believe in demons, even if I'm so-called quote-unquote pro-alien. I'm a lot more nuanced than that. So I'm not sure if that was the right solution. But I've said enough, I think.
Okay.
Chris,
yeah, really good points, though. Christopher, what you got for us?
As an Eastern Orthodox Christian, I'm a bit of an outsider and don't want to delve in too much church politics, but I just do want to remind people who aren't Catholic that the church is not one big monolith, and that each bishop appoints, there can be church politics going on that are petty, that happens everywhere. So that's probably part of the equation. But I think it was unfortunate. It seems like a massive smackdown that's out of it. It just seems really harsh. And he was one of the most balanced exorcists that's speaking, because you have far more radical people like Father Chad Ripperger who are saying less less nuanced things. So my hope is simply that the big shakeup here forces the church to have the conversation. We need to be talking about this. We need to say what is sort of within the bounds of church doctrine and what would be out of bounds, So I just hope it turns into something good, but I think it was an unfortunate decision.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with the sentiment. And it's just, everything that I saw him say about the UFO thing, it just didn't seem like that big of a deal. It seemed like legit. It seemed logical. It seemed totally reasonable. And so when this came out, it was just kind of like, that just doesn't pass the smell test for me. Like, it had to be something that was just kind of, well, we'll say that it's that, but it's some more as well. And maybe it was like more nuanced. There were some things around his ministry that were of concern to me, at being someone that came out of working in deliverance ministry with exorcists, being trained in Vatican City with Roman Catholic exorcists and on deliverance ministry. The whole attitude of doing like big deliverance sessions online with lots of people there, that to me seemed very dangerous, because if you're running a deliverance ministry online, if a person has a demonic manifestation in their home before their computer and they're all alone, like, you can have health issues with that. You could have a demonic manifestation and they don't have anyone there to help them. And so that to me was really didn't rub me the right way about the ministry. I was also at a conference where he started doing deliverance prayers over 100 people in Latin. And I'm sitting there going, this is not smart. Like, what if someone has a demonic manifestation? Because I've seen that before plenty of times, And so I think that part of this was, I think the ministry got maybe a little too big, and the whole situation just kind of collapsed because it had a lot of popularity. There were a lot of people, and I'm not saying that the ministry did bad. I'm just saying that there were some things I think that were controversial about it that were mishandling the situations, but I am not going to say that his ministry didn't help anyone. I know that there are lots of people that watch my YouTube channel that talk about how great he has been, how much he's helped them. And I'm not here to negate that or anything. I just think that there were some issues with that ministry that I think that this was one of those like hammer of justice coming down kind of thing. Of course, that's just speculation. I have no knowledge about that whatsoever. That's just my 2 cents. I could be completely wrong.
But Chris said something really important. I'm not going to name other names because then I'll get in trouble. He already started. I can think of off the top of my head, I won't name like 3 priests who have said way worse things and have had no negative consequences. And so that to me, that's really bizarre. Like,
that's also diocese, right? I mean, when people think about the Catholic Church from an outsider's perspective, they think, you know, like there's the owner, and that's the Pope. Maybe God owns it. Maybe the Pope owns it. I don't know. And then you've got branch managers, but that's just not the way it works. And, you know, given where a priest is incarnated or where their ministry is located, that will, you know, change based upon all sorts of relationships with religious orders and relationships to the diocesan bishop, et cetera, or to universities. So, you know, it always make things, you know, complicated to assess from the outside. But I think Teresa brings up a really important point, which is, or at least leads us to an important point, which is we have this sort of emerging, you know, Christian interest in UAPs and NHI at a larger scale, as well as a sort of a ballooning, I don't want to say exorcism industry, but a kind of exorcism industry of the sort of increasingly public and social media presence of exorcists, which is a somewhat, pardon the pun, a new phenomenon. And there's a sort of an odd relationship between them because they're both dealing with the anomalous. And I think one of the questions that sort of lurks in the background for us, and this just for me as a sort of medievalist, is where these two worlds overlap. And I think there's a tendency for those of us who are sympathetic to the UAP question in a positive light, want to keep them apart. But there's a certain place, once you've gone deep enough into it, you realize they can't be that far apart.
There's a lot of overlap, and that's something that I think all of us are really interested in. And like for me, and I've told this story before, but I have my own experience where I saw what appeared to be gray aliens in my room. And after this experience, I did have an implant in my leg that had to be surgically removed. So when I later on reverted to Catholicism, and then here I am in Vatican City meeting with Roman Catholic exorcists from all over the world, and they're showing images in their presentations about people that were possessed and these objects that were embedded in their bodies. I'm going, okay, maybe there's a link here. And because for me, when I came out of the darkness that I went through, I had experienced demonic possession when I was in the occult and experiencing these things. Coming out on the other end of it, I'm trying to make sense of that, right? It was easy for me, I think, early on just to go, this is all demonic. Signed, sealed, delivered, everything is demonic, right? It's easy for that pendulum to swing that other way. But then whenever you stabilize, right, you take the years of healing, you take it seriously, you learn theology, you dismantle the false belief systems, you lean into your faith, right? It helps you to become way more protected, that then you can look at it a little bit more logically and go, okay, maybe there is some of this that's demonic, but maybe there's some of this that's not. And it becomes easier to approach it without the trauma threads. I know that Christopher has some trauma in his past too that he's been talking about on his channel. And that's the thing with experiencers. A lot of this stuff is absolutely traumatic. And so there are going to be overlaps with the demonic because demons feed on evil and things that are traumatic. So it's an interesting overlap. And I think that that is really, like Luke, like you said, it's the nexus point of a big part of this conversation on multiple fronts. UAP, NHI, even remote viewing, like down the list of the anomalous, there's absolutely a big gray area in all of them where it's like, okay, what are we talking about here? And we have to go down into the doctrine. You have to get into the weeds. You have to go deep to understand, like, what are the threads of this? Because Satan has a shiny light, right? Everything can appear so shiny, but it's like when you get down and dirty in the doctrine and go, no, okay, we're going to approach this very carefully and we're going to do the work, then the conversation changes. And that's what I am starting to see now that I'm meeting the right people that like y'all have the backgrounds that you have, had the education that you have the experience to be able to step into these conversations and pull out the dregs of the doctrinal aspects that are so important.
But I think it's, with the work that Matthew does, for instance, on sort of, let's call it UAP science, and what kind of prism that that crystal, you might say, brings to the whole issue, and how much that transforms, let's say, someone who thinks it's entirely demonic. What would it mean when Matthew comes out and says, okay, here are all the kinds of things that we can detect that are anomalous?
Yeah, I'm really glad. I'm really glad you pointed at me, because I want to say, I think that Teresa, you brought up physical evidence, and I think that's really critical, that even though there's overlap, I think there's something we can separate here, which is there's a big difference to me between like a nail or, things that show up like that in possession cases, and like a piece of metamaterial that can bend space-time or warp light or something. It's like, what? Like, it seems like, what purpose would a spiritual being need from something extremely complex and high tech? Like, yeah, you could say it's a deception. That's a pretty hefty, deception with no purpose, because the purpose of demonic deception is to lead you away from God. If something instead leads you towards God, then it's kind of a backfire, right? So like, it doesn't make any logical sense. And so I feel like while there is overlap, I can drive a wedge between random objects and things that are clearly like microchips, high technology, and things that are beyond even current human capability. I just calling that demonic, sure, it's possible, anything's possible, we don't know. That seems like a big stretch to me, like a huge stretch. I see
what you're saying, and it's a good point. I do think there's a little bit of a nuance, though, because there can be, I just want to add this in because I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think the nuance is there can be demonic things that can happen that are inspired by demons that a person might interpret it in a way that's going to push them toward God instead of toward the evil. And so I think that's also something to say, because you know what I'm saying? Like, when people tell these stories and they have something demonic happen to them, maybe it makes them lean in toward that evil, or maybe it causes a reversion or a conversion, So I think that's a little bit important to mention too.
But there are also people who, I know numerous people, like, I don't want to, say names, violate people's privacy or trust, but I know numerous scientists who found their way back to Christianity through studying UFOs, not because they thought it was demonic, because it's possible, like you just said, but because they're impressed by the wonders of God's creation, and that if there are aliens that just like that are intelligent, that there's more evidence of God's like creative power. And so the point that I was trying to make is that that's a huge backfire if it's like a deception and growing darkness kind of thing. But I know you definitely have counterexamples as well, where you said there's overlap also with the occult. And in fact, I was pretty upset when a few weeks ago I was at a UFO conference and there was like a tarot card reading booth, and I'm like, this is exactly the kind of nonsense that's people are going to point at and say, see, it's all the same, it's all demonic. I'm like, no, we just need to kick those people out, of the camp. But I was really unhappy. I was like, this is feeding this whole concept that it's 100% demonic. And so, yeah, I was really upset, because you're right, there is overlap. There definitely is, and I can't deny that.
But you did bring up, and you and I were talking about this the other day, and you actually made me think a lot deeper about this issue when you mentioned, hey, Teresa, like, if there's a physical object and it's some metal that doesn't come from the planet or whatever, using your fancy scientific words, you're like, wouldn't that be something that would be like a huge physical indicator that there's something here that's more than meets the eye and it's not demonic? And I was like, okay, well, yeah, that's a good point. So I totally, you made me think a lot deeper about that. But I do want to go, I want to pivot a little bit, because I want to get time to talk about doctrine and theology, because we have such an excellent panel here to do this kind of conversation. And so I want to read this off, and then I want to pose a question to the group. So as far as I can tell, and y'all can tell me if I'm wrong on this, I don't think that the Catholic Church has a particularly official or explicit teaching declaring whether extraterrestrial life exists, right? We don't.
I don't think we do. I think what people will do, and I'm not going to name names because who we're talking about. People will draw from other statements the implicit doctrine that there either is or is not.
Okay,
a
guys, so it's
statement
a
on
little
it,
bit
right?
of like misinformation online when people grab onto something and then like get really emotional and start charging like, oh, I think we all know who we're talking about. Okay, so that was just a little aside there. So, however, the theologians and Vatican astronomers have frequently noted that the discovery of intelligent extraterrestrial life would not contradict Catholic doctrine. The church views the universe as a product of God's creative freedom. If God chose to create life elsewhere, it would be seen as another expression of his infinite creative power. So, what I see is that there's a lot of tension online between Christians, generally, some of whom think all UAP phenomena are demonic, and others who are more open minded. But this idea of this discovery of intelligent extraterrestrial life like would be a product of God's creative freedom, like how I want to pose this to the group in y'all's opinion, like how should we as faithful Christians approach this topic?
Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to go
All
first.
right, you go for it, Matthew.
And I'm not a theologian, but I'll tell you, after reading Thigpen's book, I think we should approach the topic with humility and also stop being ahistorical, because you have to read what church fathers wrote millennia ago on this topic and stop assuming that for thousands of years, Catholic Church said the opposite. So the whole idea that intelligent life elsewhere in the universe would completely like demolish Catholic dogma is a relatively new concept. It's like a 21st century concept when there's actually millennia of the opposite. Now people will cherry pick like quotes from specific popes, and I'll challenge anyone, because I've read Thigpen's book and others, for every anti-alien Catholic quote they give me, I'll give them 2 pro. Like it's really not a done deal, and there's not a set doctrine. And I think it's important to approach the topic by looking at what have saints written, what have doctors of the church written, what have church fathers written before there were different denominations. I'm talking about, first like millennium, okay, and really look at what people have said, and people, if they actually read what's actually been written, they'll see that there's a shocking amount of things written, and every possible criticism has already been addressed. Oh, would Jesus have to be reincarnated? What about Mary? There's literally 3 or 4 different speculative but different potential answers for literally every single criticism I've seen levied online. The problem is people will just fire off a tweet, but nobody has the attention span anymore to sit down and read a book, right? And that includes, obviously, the most important book, Scripture, because Holy Scripture has lots of important things on this matter that can be interpreted, I know, different ways. I know that, but sit down and read. And don't just fire off, half-baked tweets and like without actually looking at what has been written on this topic going back decades, centuries, and millennia.
Great answer. Luke, can you answer next? And would you also please define extraterrestrial?
Well, okay. So I'm gonna be the difficult one. I'll say I think Matthew's right that it's not something that would. Let's say, okay, let me take a step back. I'm going to shift extraterrestrial into non-human intelligence, because I think extraterrestrial is perhaps too limiting. Non-human intelligence indicating another form of life that is personal like ours. And so I would presume in the Imago Dei, of course, there will be others who will say, well, maybe there is intelligent life that's not in the Imago Dei. But I'm a good Bonaventurian and Dionysian who thinks that all the angels are, in the Imago Dei, and so we're going to run with that. That doesn't necessarily mean something that has to be not of this earth. It could be another life that is of this earth, that is in some mode corporeal, but not human. And so we're talking about it. Maybe if we're going to use the language of C.S. Lewis, not a son of Adam, not a daughter of Eve, unless you propose a pre-cosmic fall. Yeah. So that's another interesting question. But I'm going to push and say I think that there was a genuine difficulty here, which is that the thought worlds that we build around doctrine, the images and the other assumptions that we draw from it, are still largely based around a conception of the universe that is, functionally heliocentric. And I think these sorts of, let's say, the picture that we have of the operation of the church and the sacraments and all these other sorts of things work insofar as we assume humanity as the center of the universe. And likewise, the incarnation is kind of the central historical event. So I think to challenge that in some ways that doesn't even, let's say, upend those things, but sort of reframes them in one way or another is a challenging sort of thing. And I think we shouldn't diminish the kind of sort of architectonic shift that one would undergo to say, like, well, okay, actually, let's embrace the notion that there is an incarnation for every corporeal species, or that all corporeal species actually participate in our incarnation. I mean, those are two different kinds of, or the incarnation that pertain to humanity. Those are both difficult sorts of things, because either you end up with sort of separate churches for every species, which is an odd way to have a kind of inclusivist Christianity. On the other hand, you have this strange position where is humanity sort of this priestly species among the rest of the universe. And I mean, the speculations get out there, and they get difficult. And I like to say, and I've said this to some of you before, that we still even haven't metabolized the idea doctrinally and sort of let's say sort of in terms of religious symbology of humans being multicellular life, right? That there are individual lives that go on and end inside of us all the time, right? Likewise with deep time, and I still think we're dealing with, we still haven't come to really make sense of us not being the center of the universe, because functionally we still speak that way. And I think a lot of the work, let's say, that someone like a Bernard Lonergan has done to point in the direction of, well, what does it mean for Christianity to deepen its doctrine through modern science? We're just beginning that work. And
great answer.
This is just one other piece that shows how that is still very much underway.
Beautiful.
And how that relates to dogma is not the same as how it relates to explanations.
Well, I'm going to have a direct question a little deeper on that for you in just a second, Luke. Christopher, do you have anything to add to this part? I know we're going deep right now. We're in the weeds right now.
Well, it's great. I want to quote a verse from Scripture that I think is relevant to this whole discussion and how we frame it, and that is Proverbs 25:2. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, and the glory of a king to search it out. I think, the Scriptures give us the framework for our relationship with God and what situation we find ourselves in as human beings and how we are to be saved, but they don't tell us everything about the whole universe. There's been a lot of surprises already. We thought we were the center of everything. It was actually a huge shock to the system when a new world was discovered with people that were not descended from the clans listed in the Table of Nations in Genesis. It is definitely surprising and still blows me away when you start looking at quantum physics and sort of how matter itself seems to bilocate, or we definitely haven't digested all of that. So is it possible that there could be other life out there created by God? I think yes. My overall take on this subject is it's best if we don't do this work from the armchair, but actually start looking at, it's really bad if the church has kind of a track record of prematurely coming to a conclusion and ruling things out and then discovering, whoopsie, now we have to accommodate this, and we look pretty dumb in the process. So I think it's best if we it drives me insane for sort of theologians to speculate on it must be this way and ignore the actual body of literature that we already have of ufology. Like, read the ufology literature, people. You listen to an experiencer, an abductee. Like, that's the starting point for me, is the people that have already met the phenomenon.
It's interesting you say that, Christopher, because when I was thinking about the question, when I asked you guys what books or documentaries, I'm sitting here like, I don't even think I could answer that, because I tripped and fell head first into ufology. I'm like, I don't even know what I would tell people, because I guess I try to approach it from more of a sociological standpoint, where I'm like, let's talk about the islands of thought. Let's talk about the cults. Let's talk about all the different groups and the different belief systems inside of it. Because if you want to have an understanding of ufology, you have to have an understanding of all the different ways that people approach ufology based on their worldview. Really, it's a study of worldview.
Agreed, actually.
Yeah.
But I'd like to add to what Christopher said, something else that people really should also keep in mind, adding to what Chris said, the fact we discovered thousands of planets outside of our solar system, of which we estimate about 20% are probably habitable by the human definition of habitability. That's in a tiny fraction of the sky. You extrapolate that to the Milky Way galaxy, it's trillions of planets. Extrapolate that to the observable universe, there are probably more habitable planets in the universe than, I don't know, pick your favorite analogy with grains of sand and ocean. And so if there are no aliens, it begs the question, like, why did God create this gigantic empty universe? And so, people talk about statistics and the ability and what's the probability of life being created. The numbers I've just quoted you are so vast that when people, make these claims about, life couldn't come spontaneously, couldn't be generated because it would be like a tornado blowing through a junkyard and assembling a 747. Yeah, but the numbers that I just quoted are so big in terms of the number of exoplanets in our universe that's not good enough. Like, you need something even rarer than that. Even rarer than that classic, creation versus evolution example. Like, so if there are no intelligent life forms, the universe is extremely empty and extremely big. And so I would say, like, again, just like Chris talking about reading literature and understanding what's out there, it bothers me. We're still arguing about whether Pluto's a planet. Who cares? Like, our solar system.
Pluto. Yeah, Pluto's a planet. Come on.
Yeah, well, but I'm just saying it's not important. We consider thousands of planets everywhere, and it's like nobody talks about that, and we don't.
Thousands of Plutos.
Yes, all the Plutos. Well,
all the Plutos.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for this rant. I love it because it's a perfect springboard into a question that I've been so excited to ask this group, because we were talking about this in our group thread the other day. This is probably a few weeks ago now, but I was just so blown away by the answers we were getting from y'all, from other people as well. And it's just really interesting to me. So I want to bring this up. And I know that the people that follow my channel are going to be really excited about this question. So a common area of theological speculation involves how the mystery of the incarnation and redemption would apply to non-human intelligent beings. What are your thoughts on this aspect? Luke, could you take us away?
I'll try. So, I come at this one always with a bit of consternation, because I'm a Bonaventurian, which means I think the incarnation is kind of the middle of everything. The difficulty here is, of course, Matthew just said, is that you have now a universe that we understand to be statistically likely to be not without a great number of habitable planets. And the centrality of the incarnation as an act for us would seem to be sort of maybe diminished if it were something that had to be repeated elsewhere. So, I think what we run into is this problem where if it becomes sort of a universal happenstance, it's like a middle that's everywhere, right? Or you can take another approach, which is, maybe the incarnation works for us, but for other races, deification occurs through some other instrumental means. And if that's the case, then it really seems to diminish that act, which is so at the center of Christian theology, and sort of turns it into almost a mechanical device. So I think that's one of the more troubling places to go, because it really forces us to confront what we think the mystery of the incarnation does for the cosmos. And I don't think there's an easy answer there. And I love to always say that, the difficulty here is sort of in the ecclesiology. Like, what does it mean to have, let's say, a church of more than humans? Or, you could say, well, that's already the case with the angels. I like to say that the angels are members of the church and members of the body of Christ. I think there's a good deal of literature that takes that stance. Not every church father or theologian will go that way, but I follow Dionysius in taking that. He says very nicely in the ecclesiastical hierarchy and the celestial hierarchy that our priesthood is a share in their priesthood, which means it's only a share in Christ's priesthood. So I think you could certainly run along those lines and take what you have among the angels as a model. But in our perspective, generally, what occurs in humanity has a significance for the angels, even though Christ is not necessarily incarnated in the angels or spiritualized as an angel. So you might there have a model saying that something that happens in one comes to the benefit of many. But then there's think about, the necessity of that being known. And let's take what Matthew suggests, and that you have the emergence of life, intelligent life in many other places that will never know it. Well, that would be very cruel to say, well, it occurred in humanity, and you're very lucky if you speculate that something like that kind of mediation happens somewhere else in the universe. Okay, die and find out, or maybe wait for the eschaton. So that's not really an answer, but that's hopefully some bones to throw out about the kinds of difficulties that it raises, and also speculative possibilities.
Interesting. Thank you for that.
On that final difficulty, I would say actually it isn't very different from our situation right here on Earth, where it took 1,000+ years for Christians to reach a whole group of people across the ocean who had no clue. So this is all in the mystery of divine providence. But to back up to just the original question, if there are other forms of intelligent life out there, I think from an Eastern Orthodox perspective, where we're probably going to start instinctively is with Maximus Confessor, and the ideas Saint Maximus Confessor brings about the Jesus Christ as the one Logos, who is also the many Logi, the connection he has to all created beings. And it's an instinct in Orthodox patristic theology that man is at the center of the cosmos in this mediating role that sort of summarizes all of the other layers of creation. Yeah. And that this is why the incarnation happens in humanity, because Jesus is sort of recapitulating everything in all of creation by becoming one of us and recreating our nature from within. So I think the Orthodox instinct would be to suspect that the one man, Jesus Christ, the one God-man, would also be the answer for any other rational beings out there. I'm not as fond of the one incarnate Logos on every system approach, but who knows, the one Logos is the many Logi idea in Maximus might even be amenable to that, but it's definitely not my go-to.
Go ahead.
Here's this question: do only fallen humans need Christ's redemption? And again, this comes down to your cosmology. Yeah. Some will say that the incarnation is essentially a repair operation for humanity. Others will say that in fact Christ is the completion of the universe. Like Maximus, and Bonaventure is there somewhat. Albert the Great is certainly there on that position, saying, what is the purpose of the incarnation? And of course, Scotus afterwards, to complete the entirety of the universe. And Dionysius is clear that the angels require Christ, not because they're fallen, but because you need the coming forth of divinity as a creature to come forth to all creatures. As Christopher said, in this meeting place, but his point is that, well, what happens if we have other human equivalents, or is there something substantially different between humans and other kinds of corporeal NHI?
I think there are many solutions to this, and I'm going to go back to Thigpen's book. There's literally, this question is a crucial question, and a lot of people online, especially in the last few weeks, months, have said, "Oh, yeah, that disproves aliens. There's no solution." There's like 3 or 4 different solutions, and we could argue and speculate, but it is speculation. Thigpen covers all the possibilities. One Jesus in humanity for everybody, a different Jesus in every system. He goes through the pros and cons of every single option with scripture quotes, pro and against all these possibilities. And guess what? There are plenty of solutions. So it's completely false to say that Catholic or Orthodox doctrine is in rubble if we discover aliens. No, that's not true at all. And in fact, so to the Mandy effect, I think one of our viewers right now said my favorite solution will really annoy a bunch of people online, and that's fine. They can hate me all they want. Jesus wouldn't hate. They can judge me all they want, but my favorite answer is that only humans fell. We're kind of like the scum of the universe, as opposed to being the most important or the center. and that we will learn one day. My speculation is we'll learn one day, oh yeah, Jesus had to come to us because no other race fell. They're like, oh, it's humans. They're like, like, yeah. But in fact, Padre Pio, when people have argued about what he said, I went back to the original quote, and so I'm not going to get this wrong. And I sent this to Christopher in our thread. Go back to the original quote. Is Padre Pio didn't say aliens exist. He didn't say aliens did not exist. His exact words in Italian were, they probably exist, and they probably didn't fall. And so he had a similar idea as me. So my hypothesis, again, I'm just speculating as a Catholic, not as a scientist. I think humans are kind of like, the disabled child that God loved more. You know what I mean? Like, or God loved equally. But you know what I mean? If you're a parent of children, like, you don't love a child that is disabled less. Of course not. I think it's the same thing with God. Is he loved humanity more or equal, like as other races because we fell? You see what I mean? So I think one possibility is only we need Jesus. There are other possibilities. So C.S. Lewis has said that, for example, Aslan in Narnia, he didn't mean it, Aslan, to be a Jesus analog. He said, no, that's actually Jesus in that other universe or planet or whatever. And so there are that possibility, but I share Luke and Christopher's discomfort with that because there's plenty of scripture passages about the incarnation being important for the entire universe, and it's pretty clear in scripture. And so I think I like my pet hypothesis more, that only humans needed saving and other races are like, oh, you humans, why did you eat the apple? We didn't. You know what I mean? Like,
I hear you.
That's a possibility.
I hear you. I think that I have some issues with that, because I guess the hypothesis that maybe would make more sense would be that NHI would, like, different species would be good or bad, because when you get into the concept of like abduction, like, and I'm just saying if that stuff is actually NHI, right? And if, let's just say for a second that it is, then I think it would be much more like reasonable, I think, to assume that they're just like us and they are sinners too, and they're a little bit good and a little bit bad, and there's a lot of like weird stuff going on with, you know what I'm saying? To me, what bothers me about that hypothesis, if it were true that humans were the only ones that fell and were the only sinners and all the other NHI, like they're all sinless. What bothers me as a human about that is that then we stand at a great risk for idolatry. If there is contact made by these beings and we're the sinners and they're perfect, there's like, that to me is like a big red flag of this danger of then there being alien worship, right?
Well, and to go along with that, okay, let's presume a contact of some kind. Hypothetically, what does their religion look like, right? And, I think that this is where, intercultural studies is a very interesting sort of thing. And what does the church's mission to them look like, right? And what is it like to be also on the colonized side for once? So often, especially those of us coming out of the Western and European context, we come at this from the perspective of often being the colonizers. But I think that there's much to gain, thinking especially through the colonized peoples of the world. Like, what is it like to be on that opposite side? What is it like for the church to be in that position, which, even though it doesn't have the same kind of power now that it had in the past, has generally wielded a decent amount of power in the past, let's call it 1700 years or so.
I've got to jump in here and say something, because again, my point is always bringing this back from the armchair speculation to the real experience in the ufology world that's already happening. And that the fact here is that people already are having contact with beings who are presenting themselves as higher than us. And this happens all the time throughout history. Angels of light come and present themselves with a new gospel, right? And they always present themselves as superior, and here's a new message. And so there are definitely contactees already in the world of ufology who are receiving counter gospels that present them as enlightened beings, and then they have a new message about Christ, and he was just one of us, an ascended master. And so we have to be really careful here, because there's a huge opportunity for deception as soon as we open ourselves sort of heedlessly to the idea that there may be a superior being. Now, there could be superior beings out there, but and we know there are with the angels, but there's this huge problem. I think humans have a little bit of an inferiority complex. We look at the state of the world and say, man, we're awful. And I think there can be a real serious tendency to be like, man, we're ready to hand the steering wheel over to anyone else who offers,
Yeah.
And I think that would be a big mistake.
I agree with you, Christopher, and I love that you're bringing the pulse in on this issue, because I think you and I have some similar experiences, and we've also both experienced a person being demonically attacked and manifesting demonically. We've both been present during those kinds of deliverance prayers and seen the reality of spiritual warfare. I don't know too much about y'all's background, Matthew and Luke, on that front, but there's a lot here that can draw people into demonic pacts and agreements, and these false aliens, these demons that are masquerading as aliens across the board. Like, when you listen to a person talk about what these aliens are saying to them, and you put that up against the Bible, you put that up against doctrine, you're like, what are they actually saying? What I see is two things: a demonic spirit of Antichrist, a demonic spirit of delusion. Those two things to make a person break with reality, get so confused about what's true and what's false that their brain falls out, because they start to distrust everything at all. That's like you trip into conspiracy land, and then you go down into the black hole, the black pit of that, and you start to disintegrate your worldview, and you don't know what you can believe. And then you're prime target then for demonic attacks around what you want to think is real, and it's delusion. And then there's the whole other side that you were mentioning, Christopher, around the spirit of Antichrist. So thank you for bringing that up. I think it's critical to this discussion, especially as we're talking about the gray area. Yeah.
And speaking of gray area, I wanted to respond because I threw this big bombshell in there, and I wanted to clarify something, which is that, if there are entities that lead you away from Christ, then obviously that tells you that it's either demonic or if it is flesh and blood, then it's a malevolent, NHI entity. But I'm saying that we shouldn't put everything in one basket, because what if, again, this might never happen, but there's lots of science fiction and fantasy like this. Let's say, aliens land on the White House lawn and be like, we ask them about religion. They're like, oh yeah, we love Jesus. And is he ascended master? Oh, no, he's better than that. He's the son of God. You know what I mean? Like, what if there are plenty? There's a Twilight Zone episode like this called The Gift, where there's this alien that lands in this small town in Mexico, and this little boy asks him about God, and he's like, well, the Son of God came to you guys and he crucified. Like, he was. So I think it's again, Paul talks about discernment of spirits. And so I completely agree that there's a lot of malevolence and really weird stuff going on. And there's nuance here. So going back to, I quoted Padre Pio earlier. Padre Pio said, oh yeah, they're probably aliens and maybe they're not fallen. There are quotes attributed to him where he claims that there are no such thing as alien abductions, that they're all demonic. That's a big nuance there. And so another nuance is all UFOs could be demonic, and yet aliens can still exist and have never visited us yet. They're like,
of course.
Abilities.
Yeah.
And so it's important to not say, like, just because everything looks a certain way, there could still be divisions. And I think you have to judge by the fruits.
Yeah.
What is the result? Do you grow closer to Christ, or do you grow closer to the occult? And so I think by judging by what happens to people in their experiences, in their interactions, I think we can start to separate the positive and negative ones. And they're not all negative. Even if the majority is, I don't think it's 100%.
There's even nuance in that, though. I have to take pause on that. That's literally what my book is about, is because the occult looks so shiny that people can get involved in this stuff and think it's shiny, feel like it's shiny, and they're in it for years and sometimes their entire lives. And they think they're in the light. They think they're following Christ. So there's a lot of nuance. And this is why I bring up the spirit of Antichrist and the spirit of delusion, because you can be looped up in these demonic spirits and you can be down a track that you think is the track of Christ, and be all love and light and everything's going well, and demons can pretend and they can draw people into this delusion for a while. And so I like to add that into the conversation, because I think, like, when you get into the like positive or negative, like that, it can, a person that's in the occult can experience that and or hear that and reinforce their own false worldview. So I just think we need to be careful when we're discussing that. And I hear what you're saying. I agree with you. I just wanted to add that little nuance into that one particular part on that.
Yeah. The occult is very Christ friendly in a lot of cases. It's like, but it's Christ and, this other stuff. Like, well, yeah.
But my point is, though, that eventually, though, and you're much more experienced in this. You have a book on this, Teresa, so you're much more experienced. But my understanding from like listening to things like, for example, the Exorcist files, we were talking earlier about social media, no exorcisms, that, but like demons can't help it. Eventually you're led into sin. You can't just, it can't stay shiny. And again, you can correct me if I'm mistaken, Teresa, but eventually, like, they don't gain anything if they're not leading you into sin sooner rather than later. Yeah,
no, you're right. But I think also, like, even in sin, people, if they don't know what sin is and they're not, like, you can be living in sin and be thinking you're on the top of the world. And so this is why I say, like, the spiritual substance of our lives can look very, very different person to person. And I think that's an important nuance. We're talking a lot about nuance, right? Like, the sanctification or theosis that a person is undergoing can look very different person to person. And it can look on the outside like sanctification or theosis. Maybe it's not. Like, a person that's in a false belief system, a person that is, unbeknownst to themselves, following Satan into the pit, their lives could look on the surface like great, look just fine,
But you need to have a confessor, a priest you trust, a spiritual mentor, because you can't judge things on your own. You can't just live in a vacuum with your own ideas, because you could deceive yourself. That's why it's so important to have friends who are good Christians who can help you discern whether you have fooled yourself into going down a dark path.
Agreed. I totally agree with that sentiment, Matthew. I think that's extremely important to bring up. Well, okay, we could probably just talk and talk and talk, guys, but I think we're going to close this down. I have one more question that I want to pose to everybody. What is next for you when it comes to ufology? What is next up on the list? What are you tackling when it comes to UAP? Why don't we start with Christopher? Because I already know Christopher's answer. Why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I just launched a podcast called Answers in the Anomalies, and the goal is to really delve into all the nuance in detail and look straight into all the weird stuff that's going on that doesn't fit our paradigm. This is an insight from Thomas Kuhn. The way that scientific revolutions happen is by paying attention to the details that don't really fit in our paradigm. And often those are the clues that we've got something wrong about our framework. So in a world that is essentially still kind of caught in materialism, I want to take a look straight at all the weird stuff that doesn't fit. And I find that the UFO topic is a through thread that leads to absolutely everything else anomalous. You start out studying nuts and bolts craft, and pretty soon you find that you have to learn about parapsychology and telepathy, and you're pretty soon studying the ancient gods, and it just gets bizarre really fast. I met some people that were involved with the first animal mutilation case, Snippy the horse, and asked them a question. I try to often get people's sort of spiritual background, and I found out that before the animal mutilation ever happened, the woman that was the owner of the farm was actually calling in UFOs with a Ouija board. And so that's, the kind of thing that really raises the questions about the nature of the phenomenon. I just think it's really important for people to remember that when we say something like the phenomenon, it doesn't have to be one source. I think it's multifaceted and a lot of different layers going on. So I'm exploring this question in detail through my podcast, and I'd love if you'd tune in.
Thank you so much, Christopher. It's so awesome to see you starting this podcast. I really enjoyed the first episode. It was such easy listening. You're such a good speaker, and you're so thoughtful, and I was just really enjoying all of it. So I can't wait for the next episode, and congrats on launching the podcast. I know that's a lot of work. And so, yeah, we dropped the link down in the description so y'all can find that. It's Answers in the Anomalies podcast. Thanks for being on here, Christopher. We appreciate you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm telling my story on the way, my own weird story, bit by bit.
Nice. All right, Matthew, why don't you let us know what's next for you in ufology?
Oh, a great deal, because like I said earlier, we can't just be in the armchair, and we've got to do things. And so at University at Albany, we're one of the only universities on planet Earth, I think it's like 5, 2 in the US is Harvard, that we actually have private funding through a generous donation by Tony Gorman. We have this excellent a donation to pursue UAP studies through instrumented field expeditions. So I'm, ready to admit, sure, maybe there's no such thing as aliens. Maybe UFOs are demonic, or they're, the natural phenomenon or something. But I think like Christopher and others say, you can't deny something's happening. There's a there, and I want to understand what it is. But also, I agree that it's multifaceted. But also, nothing makes me, angrier than being told I'm not allowed to say something or look. I know what it is. Another species on Earth with us. It's extraterrestrial. Is it, demonic? It's like, let's get to the truth. You cannot get to the truth by putting your head in the sand. And so at University of Albany, I'm now part of. This is it's a years-long project that's been rebranded as UAlbany Project X, where we're going to study UAP scientifically with field equipment, not just cameras, but cameras across the electromagnetic spectrum, radiation detectors, all kinds of stuff. And like Luke said earlier, this is part of a relatively recent, we're talking last 10 years, a push in academia and universities towards more instrumented studies. But we're not just going out in the field and trying to catch UFOs. We're also working on materials analysis, trying to find materials. People are always claim they have a piece of a crashed UFO. Unfortunately, most of the time it's a rock or an airplane, human airplane that crashed. But I feel like physical evidence is far more compelling than yet another video. And so we have a parallel thrust where we're also doing material analysis, we're doing elemental and isotopic analysis of alleged crash UFO parts, to trying to get to the bottom of things from the physical evidence perspective as well. So we've really got an interdisciplinary and multifaceted approach that's trying to tackle this question from multiple angles. And I totally think we're not going to find the answer. We're going to have a plural, multiple answers, because it's a mixture of things. I think everyone's partially right or partially wrong, and I don't know what percentage that is of these different types of NHI or whatever. Let's get to the bottom of this and use the scientific method and push for that next revolution, for the next Kuhnian revolution. So that's what's next on my docket.
So exciting. Wow. Thank you for sharing.
Hey, wait, I'm sorry, Matthew, are you allowed to tell people which part you actually have? The hardcore ufologists want to know if you're able to share that detail.
Oh,
the one you're studying.
I have everything. And I'm very grateful and humbled that people have trusted me with this. I've got samples from the Delphos, Kansas landing soil. I've got Roswell parts. I've got San Augustine plains. I've got one of the Ark parts. I've got at one point I tested an Ubatuba sample, and I'm extremely humbled and grateful for the people who trusted me for testing their samples using material analysis. I'm forgetting a lot there. Maury Island, I've been getting a sample from that recently. Like I'm just going down the list, and people are sending me things. But like I said, I have to warn you that most of the time, and people get really angry and disappointed, I find that there's a mundane explanation, like it's a piece of an airplane or it's a rock. And people get very angry, and they start saying, I'm part of the cover-up. No, I'm not. I have one goal, which is to find the truth with a capital T. And if that truth is you gave me a piece of an airplane or a rock, I have an obligation, a moral obligation to tell the truth. So I'm not part of any cover-up. I want to get that one legitimate part, or more, or whatever it takes. But yeah, I got we should talk, later on.
Yeah.
Not everything. And only one or two are even remotely have a probability.
Well, the one I was driving at is the arts parts from Tom DeLonge, right? Of Blink 182.
Oh yes. I'm working with Tom DeLonge.
That's amazing.
He's such a great guy. I got to tell you, he sent me, because one of my best friends is getting married. I'm giving him a shout out here. I am deeply honored he did this. He sent me an autographed Blink 182 vinyl record. Well, actually, you know what? I just realized. Hopefully, my friend is not watching this, because then I messed up and ruined the surprise. Dang it! But hopefully, my friend is not watching this, because I just ruined it. But yeah, Tom was. I am so honored and humbled that these big name people have the trust in me to let me do scientific tests on what could be, if it's really alien, then it's a priceless artifact. And I'm honored that people are trusting me with this physical evidence.
That's incredible.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Matthew. And we're going to be following up on all that. We have so many shows to do in the future to talk about all of this. And Luke, what do you have going on? What's next for you?
I just try to connect with scholars in the background.
That's great.
Help to bring more people into the conversation. There's not much that a theologian can do on the evidential side, right? Besides, try to contact a UFO, which is an extremely dangerous thing to do. So, right. No, exactly. So, I try to talk to people about it. I'm actually trying to get a course running at one of the universities here in town. And I think that would be really cool if we could get that running. We'd be able to have some people show up to it. We'll see. We'll see if that launches. But I think a lot of the work is behind the scenes and talking about people, talking to people to help them see the extent to which this is a serious topic, and to bring out some of the aspects that are not so sensational at first.
Yeah.
And hope to develop a stronger network of people that can engage like we're doing today.
Yeah.
And to do so in a way that is level-headed and not a case of curiositas in terms of the vice, but can help us think through what this is, and if it is whatever it is, insofar as we start to know what its implications are, and to help people think through that clearly. Yeah.
I'm right there with you, Luke. I'm doing a lot of background stuff too, and it's an important part of it. It's it's a lot to approach, and with everything that is happening now in the public, with the news and the government and everything, it's a lot to experience, because there are so many people now. I thought back in 2017 and 2018, when I was deep into ufology and on the media front, that it couldn't get more popular. It was fringe back then, but now it's super, super mainstream, and more people are asking about it. And so it is pretty overwhelming. And I agree with you that it's what I see in that is that there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done to go down into those dregs of the doctrine and those sorts of things, and tease out the information and present it in ways that are accessible to people, and hitting the notes that matter as more and more people are asking about it. So I'm right there with you too. This is the first time I've gone back online actually and done any material over the last week. I had been probably over a year, and then I just felt motivated to start talking again a little bit on it. And I think in large part because I feel like I finally have a community now, you know, like those of us in that group, it's such a great group, and I'm learning so much, and it's making me feel not so isolated in the topic, but also we need to be having these conversations because it's those of us that have just I say little pieces of the pie, but it's important because we can throw ideas off of each other and refine our beliefs and stuff. And I'm actually working on a book that's going to be published by Sophia Institute Press, probably later this year, but I'm actually writing a book on aliens, which I tried to run away from that project for a while because I was just like, I don't think I can do it because, you know, my own experience is pretty traumatic around it. So then I finally, you know, told the publisher, was like, I think the only way I can write this book is if I just tell my testimony. And they said, okay, do it. So I'm actually just writing my story, and that's feeling a little bit lighter than all the other stuff because the story itself is heavy enough. So, yeah, that's what's next up for me. And then, like you, Luke, just hanging out with everybody and learning and growing together as a group. So I just want to say thank you guys so much for being here on this live stream. This was extremely edifying and fun. And thank you to all of the people that jumped into the comments section. And we have all the links below for everybody. And I hope that y'all have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. And I'm sure that you'll be back on the show soon. So everyone have a wonderful night, and we'll see you on the next stream. Bye.
Thanks, Teresa.
Thanks, Teresa. This was great.